Good morning and welcome to another show of the ZMC Business Hour, a business show brought to you by the ZMC Network, a channel dedicated to connecting communities. As we wake up this Sunday, we wake up to the news of another lockdown. The next 4 weeks, as the government has announced, shall be spent in lockdown, trying to curb this pandemic, trying to curb this virus. What does the next 4 weeks hold for you? Interesting, frightful for some, but an interesting thought. Over the weeks, we've brought you some amazing guests who've come on to the show and shared their business experiences. Today, we have another phenomenal guest. We've had to change our topic of discussion due to the announcements made last night. We shall try and keep a balance because we don't want to make the show all about COVID. However, it is a very big part of everything that's going on at the moment, particularly with the business community. Furlough has been extended, so the guest I had last week, we spoke about the furlough ending and we spoke about the job support scheme. But that furlough has now been extended for another month. And undoubtedly the government will be releasing some financial packages for the business community, but we can wait and see. So our guest this morning is a specialist in health and safety, joining us all the way from Burton. Can we all welcome Majid Waris this morning? Majid, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Good morning, Abid.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us this morning.
No, you're most welcome.
So, first of all, my apologies. We've had to change the topic of discussion slightly due to the announcements made by the government last night.
2020, Abid, you've got to get used to changing things.
Yes,
yes. At the specific moment.
So, what is Majid Waris all about? What do you do?
Majid Waris, in professional terms, there's two main business interests that I have. One is in risk management, as you've just mentioned, which includes health and safety. The other side of the business is mentoring and coaching professionals in soft skills like influencing, negotiation and sales skills. So whether it be council leaders, which is something that I do twice a year, or other professionals like lawyers, accountants and other consultants and coaches who I would train or hold a masterclass for once a year. But the main business for me is in risk management.
Risk management and health and safety. So to all the viewers this morning who are interested and want to ask questions about health and safety, risk management, or even some mentoring, please feel free to call into the studio. Our live call number is 0121 753 4131. We are being live on Facebook. Please do share our posts. Do share our channel, and please, if you have any questions, any queries, please feel free to pop them into the comments box and we shall try and get them answered. So within the health and safety sphere, Majid, I believe you spent a bit of time in the Holy Lands in Saudi Arabia. Talk us through that experience.
Well, where do I start? What an experience. So I was posted in the Haram of Mecca and Medina, mainly in Mecca, as the senior risk management consultant. So my job was to advise the principal contractors, the civil defense force, which was overlooking the safety of the sites, a special committee appointed by the king himself, who were also appointed specifically to overlook this project, and the project managers there. So the idea was to make sure that the construction phase plan, when it was carried out, the elements which related to safety and the pilgrims and the Hujjaj, it was done as safely as possible and reduce the number of accidents, incidents and whatever else on site for a number of years.
With such a population visiting throughout the year.
Yeah.
In
fact, it's probably the only construction site which is live around the world with millions of people visiting through the site every year as well. So it's like a live construction site with the Joe public walking through. It was quite something.
And how long were you there for?
So I started there in 2013 and I came back in 2016.
Wow. Okay. So health and safety, being from the insurance sector, I battle with this on a daily basis for clients.
Yeah.
But from a health and safety professional, from your perspective, what is health and safety in its core definition?
In its core definition, I mean, everybody will come up with their own way of describing what health and safety itself is. But for me, it's anything which affects the health, safety, and in legislative forms, health, safety, and well-being of the people you work with who would fall under your responsibility. Now, that could include employees, it could be contractors, it could be visitors. It could also be a category which is defined as others, in inverted commas, according to legislation. Now, when people say, well, who are others? Others are people who may not be your employees. They may not be fall under the category of being your contractors. They may not be actually your visitors, but the people who are affected by what you do and what you may not do, and which could impact them. So it could be you're in the studio right now, and the people who own the studio will have certain obligations and responsibilities. Anybody who's walking past the studio, they're not an employee, they're not a contractor, they're not visiting you, but if they're affected by any of your shortfalls, then you can land yourself in some trouble.
Okay.
So
now, when you say you can land yourself in trouble, so the example you give about the studio, if there's a member of the public walking past on the street and they happen to trip over a hazard which is outside the front door of the studio, is that really the responsibility of the studio, or is it upon that individual to make sure that they look at where they're going?
Yeah, I mean, if you have to apply the reasonable test here in legal terms, because as you know, my background is in law. We always apply, when it comes to these specific cases, the reasonable test. What would the man on the omnibus do? What would the average Joe blog do when they're walking down the street? Was it reasonably foreseeable that there'll be something in front of them which will trip them up? If not, was it reasonably foreseeable for the person who controls the building, not necessarily rents it, but controls the building, to see that the passerbys are going to be affected by what they have out there? So if they've got a trip hazard out there, was it reasonably foreseeable? And if it was, could they have reasonably done anything about it? If they could have, then they should have. That's in its basic.
What are the possible or potential implications upon the person who is responsible for the building or the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, if it lands in a claim, then obviously you've got insurance costs. If these things go to the newspapers, then you've got bad reputation, which they often do. If you've got, some people don't even have insurance, which is quite sad to see. But then you've also got, for material breaches, you've got other forms of penalties, depending on what kind of failure it was and what the outcome of that failure was. You've got things like the Health and Safety Act in itself, which stipulates that you could, for failure of breaches of Section 2 and Section 7, there are all sorts of summary convictions and indictment of penalties. I mean, there was a time when there could have been a lower level of imprisonment, but up to 6 months of up to 6 months of imprisonment and up to £20,000 fine. But that's been waived now. Throughout the years, the penalties have increased every single year. If you just look at the HSE, which is the Health and Safety Executive, their statistics on penalties and convictions, you'll see a steep rise in how much businesses are having to pay as penalties. For summary offences and summary convictions, you've got like 6 months prison or a fine, which could be unlimited, or you could have both. They might decide that you have both. For on indictment, which are more serious, you could go up to prison for up to 2 years.
Wow.
For failure of health and safety.
So what are the most common hazards that you come across in the workplace?
Common hazards in any workplace are quite common across the board, depending on the industry that you're in. I mean, depending on what kind of business or organization I'm auditing, would depend on what kind of hazards that I come across. But the most common types of hazards are physical hazards, hazards relating to ergonomics, hazards relating to chemicals, hazards relating to biological hazards itself, and psychosocial hazards. So if we talk about the first one, the physical hazards, you've got the obvious slips, trips and falls, and something relating to noise or vibration. These are classed as physical hazards. Ergonomics is everything that's affecting your musculoskeletal system. So it could be your posture, could be manual handling, your general repetitive movements. If you're doing the same movements over and over again, it's affecting your musculoskeletal system and your body positioning in general. Those kind of things are affected in the ergonomics section. And you've got chemicals, and people think, well, we don't use chemicals. But actually, even if you've got bleach or cleaning products in your toilets, they're chemicals. And they can have an adverse effect on people's health, whether it's skin irritation, dermatitis, or any kind of health effect. Could be through even smelling these chemicals, you could have adverse effects. So chemical safety, and then the PPE related to that. But all the different types of hazards that I've mentioned, including the biological ones. Biological classic example is coronavirus. It's the virus.
And we'll go on to coronavirus and the health and safety, because that's a whole massive bubble shortly. But who does the health and safety actually apply to? Are there any businesses that are exempt, or any organizations that exempt? What's the difference between a massive manufacturing plant and, let's say, a clothing retailer on one of the local high streets?
In terms of responsibility, in terms of responsibility, there's a principle in English law which is the rule of law. It's called the rule of law. Basically, the law applies to everyone, irrespective of who you are. You could be royalty, you could be local government, national, the central government, you could be a private body. The law applies to everybody. So when you've got core legal systems and legislation, that applies to everybody, irrespective of who you are. I've seen cases where local authorities have been taken to the docks, they've been fined. I've seen cases where supervisors within local authorities it's happened to, and there's several cases. If you keep up on the legal cases that take place, even on the HSE websites, you'll see an update on how many times local councils have been fined or have had action taken against. When it comes to a question of what law applies, or what kind of health and safety applies to, was it power plant that you mentioned, and
if you've got a large-scale manufacturing plant, a factory, as opposed to a local retailer, just say on the Stratford Road, a clothing outlet, how would their health and safety differ? And what would their obligations be?
Okay, in simple terms, some of this will depend on how many people are working for you, because this is another thing which we find in the industry. A lot of people have been missold health and safety services. I've been to events where health and safety salespeople who are selling services for their big companies have mentioned things like, all businesses need a health and safety policy, a written health and safety policy. That's not me saying this, that's the law saying this. And that's the way they sell it. Actually, that's not true. Those companies or businesses who have less than 5 employees, so 4 or less, they don't have to have written policies and documentation. It's always good practice to have them. But if you've got 5 or more, then it's a legal requirement that all your documentation is in order, and it's all written, risk assessments included, as well as policies. So that's the first difference in terms of whether you would have the relevant number of employees in the business. If you've got a small retail business.
So if you've got less than 5 employees, you can have just a basic health and safety package. But if you've got more than 5, then it needs to be written, documented, filed, and you've got to have a proper set of records.
Yeah. It's always a good idea to have things written, because if there's one thing that I would always encourage businesses to do, no matter what they do, always write down and document what they've done, because it's the only way you can evidence what you did in any particular situation should a claim arise, and should any situation be questioned as to what it is you've done to rectify or to make sure that the health, safety and well-being is corrected. In a manufacturing plant, again, it all depends. There's a lot of legislation that will apply depending on what kind of machinery they use. So you've got the regulations relating to machinery, you've got regulations relating to PPE, you've got regulations relating to all sorts of stuff which may apply in a manufacturing plant depending on what they're manufacturing. And of course, then you have no doubt 5 or more employees working in a manufacturing business, in which case you would have to have the proper management system that includes the policies, the procedures, the risk assessments, as well as the training.
Okay. So with COVID and throughout the whole pandemic and the first lockdown, obviously a lot of businesses were forced to close, and then in July when things started opening up, health and safety would have been at the forefront of everybody's mind in terms of PPE and making sure that it was a safe working environment for staff and for employers. What sort of trends have you seen, and how has the dynamic changed?
You know what? When it comes to coronavirus and COVID-related business practice changes, there's been a lot of wishy-washy guidelines from the government, which hasn't helped. Some of the worst kind of drafted, guidances that I've seen for a while. And there's no surprise that some business owners are going to be confused with what to do and what not to do. And as a result, you get some businesses going over and beyond what they're supposed to do, some businesses not doing enough, and some businesses who are completely oblivious to what's supposed to be done. As a trend, most businesses who are in the public eye, retail business especially, they seem to be doing a lot more than maybe they sometimes even thought about or need to do, because they feel that, they're in the public eye and they're going to be, watched. And that for that reason, sometimes these practices can become overburdensome for businesses. And I'm not a fan of overburdening businesses with things like red tape.
There's obviously a cost involved in that, and
a cost element as well.
There's a burden on making sure that everybody adheres to sometimes laws that don't need to be adhered to.
Yeah, well, it's like coming back to policies. I mean, one of the common issues that I've seen across the board, coronavirus or no coronavirus, whenever I've gone to visit a business, well, some businesses, and I'm auditing their paperwork, you pick up their policy file, and in there they've got a whole file full of documents and policies and stuff, and you think, wow, these guys have been busy. And as soon as you open the main folder and the health and safety policy statements is right in front of you, the numpties have left the old business's name in that policy, who they've downloaded the policy from. So what they've done is they downloaded these documents thinking, I'll just put that in there, but they've left the name of the previous business or college or university where they've got that policy from and in that file. Now I'm looking at that, thinking, that's not even your policy, number one. Number two, within those policies, what they often don't realize is business owners, they look at a policy and they think, wow, this policy has got a lot in it, and therefore I will take this or copy this and implement this in my business. There's a danger there, because when you've taken that policy, you may not know that some of the things within that policy may not actually be a legal requirement. In which case, you have made it a policy within your business to do something which the law didn't even ask you to do. And if you then fail to do that, you've breached your own policy. It's a double-edged sword.
For small businesses, that you just download a policy from online, you get that big poster that you put above the sink about washing your hands. You pop up a couple of fire exit signs on your doors, and the job's a good one. That's it. That's as far as the obligation goes. How true is that?
Again, it all depends on the nature of the business. And if it's a case of the business is low risk and you've taken all relevant precautions and those have been communicated to people who you work with and they're less than 5 in number, that may just be enough. But if it's not the case, then you need to assess the risks involved in the business and tackle them adequately.
Okay, so what do you feel that most businesses lack when it comes to health and safety? I mean, you've been around, you've obviously got clients on a national scale and of all sizes. What's the most common thing that businesses overlook or they lack when it comes to health and safety?
I think the most common thing that the businesses lack is the documentation, a record of what's been done, because ultimately that's what you're measured on. In the English legal system, we have several legal systems, you got criminal law, you got civil law and whatnot. It's not a case of everybody's innocent until proven guilty across the board. In some things like this, you as the defendant, somebody who has been a claim is against, somebody who's been put in the docks for failing their health and safety duties, it's your duty then, the burden of proof lies on you to show that you had done everything, and the key legal term is so far as is reasonably practicable. Did you do everything that what you could have done to prevent something from happening? Now, you may have talked about it with your staff. If you and I were working together, Abid, and I said to you, Abid, this is a hazard in the business. Make sure you stay away from this. No matter what you do not walk through this door. It's not open to you. Okay, I've told you this, but I've not put a sign up. There's only 2 of us working in the business, or 3 of us working in the business. Now you, for whatever reason, open that door and go in and injure yourself because there's so many hazards in there. Then it's your word against mine. How do I prove that I told you not to go in? It's as simple as that. If I've got it documented and I've got you to sign that these are the instructions for how you work in the business, then you have your instructions in front of you, and that's what you can show as evidence. But the key element, most important thing, is always conduct an assessment of the risks. Do a risk assessment. It doesn't have to be rocket science.
So what is a risk? What is a risk assessment, and how in detail do you need to go about risks?
The simple answer to that is, in terms of what is a risk assessment, the HSC has a guidance of the 5 steps to risk assessment. There are 5 basic steps that you need to think about when conducting a risk assessment. So within the business, the first thing you need to do is identify the hazards. What are the hazards where I work?
So in a retail outlet, and again, I come back to our local businesses, because our viewership is predominantly local businesses. What kind of hazards could they be thinking about?
The common things in retail are slips, trips, and falls. You got fire hazards. If the fire hazards haven't been controlled properly, lack of ventilation, maybe, electricity, electric installations haven't been checked, which should be checked at a minimum commercially 5 years with the certificates.
This is a massive problem, because we see this all the time as well, that electrical wiring doesn't be certified, and then when there's a claim or God forbid
you're in
death,
insurance. Yeah, you're in insurance. What are the chances? What are the chances of a claim going through if you don't have all these things in place?
Yes. And what are the penalties if you haven't got a electric certificate and there's a death on your premises?
Well, if you deliberately decided not to do what you were supposed to do, which results in death, then you've got the Corporate Manslaughter Act, which came out, I think it was 2005, 7, something like that.
There was a case recently of that nature, wasn't there? In Birmingham.
Or was there? I'm not sure in Birmingham.
There was a death in a flat above a commercial premises, and the electrical wiring wasn't certified, and it went down the corporate manslaughter route. And again, it comes down to health and safety and making sure that the documents are in place.
And you know what? They're not even. It's not even rocket science. And we're coming back to the 5 steps for the risk assessment. First, we need to identify what the hazards are. What's likely to cause any harm? When you look around, walk around, have a look. What are the chances of something in the business that can cause harm? The second step is decide who might be harmed and how. So that's the second step. It's pretty simple, isn't it? First you decide or identify the hazards, then you decide who might be harmed and how. The third step is to evaluate those risks, and implement the control measures. Evaluate what you've just seen and what you're going to do about it. The fourth step is to record your findings. That's a very important step. You document it again. Absolutely. So you record your findings. And the fifth step is actually to review what you've found every once in a while. And that's a risk assessment. You should be reviewed in 2 situations. Number 1, if there has been a significant change within the business for which that risk assessment no longer applies. So the significant change, imagine my desks are, or in the retail business, the counter is on one side of the shop and the rackings on the other side of the shop. Now you've changed that the other way around. Obviously that's a significant change that can change the hazard profile of that business. So then a risk assessment needs to be reviewed. The second reason, it's recommended on the HSC and the government guidance that you do review once every year, even if nothing significant has changed, in case you may have missed something. So, and it's simple to review. Risk assessments are simple. You just read through what you've written before, see if there's been any significant changes since then, and if there hasn't, just sign it off. Say it's just reviewed and dated. It can be as simple as that.
Okay. So what is meant by fees for intervention, FFI?
Oh, that's a good question.
That's a term that I've come across before.
Yeah.
Elaboration on that.
Right, this is really interesting because the fee for intervention actually came into force sometime around 2011. I think it came into force in 2012. Before then, what used to happen is that you've got the Health and Safety Executive, the HSE itself. They used to go out and send their inspectors out to do inspections, spot inspections, and identify any issues out there or investigate any reports that had been made. Or complaints that had been made, or somebody had reported an injury under RIDO, and they used to be fully funded by the government. Now that's changed. So what that means now, HSE inspectors or any inspectors who have the authority can come over to your business unannounced. They can review everything, and if they find anything which is of material breach or anything which they feel that needs to be improved or changed, they will bill you for the work that they've done, even though you didn't even invite them. And that nowadays, I think for the fee for intervention, they bill you £157 an hour. So, you're looking at a good few £1,000 if anything comes off the back of your business and they think, okay, this is not right. They're gonna bill you for the time it took to walk around, to interview people, to check your systems, to check your documents, to review your documents, to check your business premises, to go back to their office, to consult other specialists that they may have to consult. All that time that they accumulate will be billed to you. So even though you may not have invited an inspector around and they came round off their own back, then you're paying a hefty bill.
Is it common practice for them to come around, or is it as a result of somebody reporting, or what could trigger that visit or inspection?
So you got a couple of different ways. I mean, the health and safety inspectors, if they feel that there's something that needs to be checked, they will come and check. So basically, for example, CDM, construction design management, there's a requirement that if your project is going to last more than 30 days with 20 people on site, a minimum, or more than 500 man hours, then that project becomes a notifiable project. That needs to be notified to the HSE. We are starting a construction project. Now, if the HSE look at that project and the details and think, this is a juicy one, we could possibly make some money out of this, actually, we should pay them a visit. They may just schedule a visit. Another reason, the reporting of injuries, diseases, and dangerous occurrence regulations 2013. If any injury, incident, or accident takes place, not just to human beings, but also to plant and equipment, which falls under their definitions of what's reportable, there's a long list of things. You can always go on the HSE website and check what those are. Legally, within 15 days, as for example, an injury, you have to report that injury to the HSE under RIDO. Now, once you've done that, HSE inspector may say, okay, that's interesting. How did this happen? Why did this person break a leg? Why did this person fall off this much height? How did this person fall so ill in this place? Let's go and check them out. They might want to go and check you out. So that gives them a reason to go and check you out. It could be that a person's put a formal complaint in against you. They can come and check you out. Or it could be simply that they're just doing some outreach work, and just off chance, they're just outreaching to within the business and public, and they find you and what's going on. But by the way, there's something to remember. It's not just the HSE which has inspectors that can come out to you. There are two main bodies. You've got your own local authority with the environmental health usually, who have their own inspectors which do exactly the same role. So they've got split responsibilities. So when you think about the HSE, you're thinking of factories, you're thinking of building sites, schools and colleges, even central and local government premises, hospitals, fairgrounds. Local authorities, however, they will be looking after the shops, the offices, hotels, restaurants, pubs, takeaways, places of worship, places of shelter, nurseries, and those kind of things. So it's not just the HSE. You've got two separate bodies which function in the same way when it comes to the inspections.
Okay, so as an employee or as a customer, as a client, you spot a health and safety failing or something that you perceive to be a health and safety failing.
Yeah.
Who do you report it to, and how do you report it?
The first thing you should be doing is talking to the business owner and the people who are senior in the business and report it to them. That's the sensible thing to do, rather than being vindictive and going straight for the authorities. Now, depending on which kind of business it is, again, if it's like a factory or a building site or anything that falls into the HSC's list, then if that business owner or those people are not adhering or not rectifying the situation, then they're the people you need to contact. There's actually a reporting form on HSC websites where you can report these kind of incidents of concern. And then if it's something like local places, businesses like shops and offices and stuff like that, then you've obviously got the local authorities.
You can walk down some high streets and I'm sure you have the same view that I do, because coming from our sectors, we look at things from a certain perspective, and you spot health and safety issues, endless health and safety issues, and sometimes these need to be addressed, these need to be sorted out, and conversing with the business owners sometimes doesn't actually resolve the matter, or doesn't result in any action being taken. In that scenario, there is authorities that you can report it to. And you should. You know what? You just reminded me of a situation. I look after quite a number of large mosques as well around the UK. And it's amazing. It's not just businesses, it's charities as well. Like I said, nobody's exempt. And the charities, especially the places of worship, they have a very different view on things. I remember you and I were sat in a meeting once with a prospect, and that individual was running a large mosque. And he said, come on guys, why are you talking about risks and hazards? It's a place of worship. This is God's house. God will look after it. Do you remember that? Yes.
And and that reminds me of the way I usually get around that is explain to people, look, I was working in the Haram. I was working in Mecca, and the world's largest mosque, which is considered God's house, Baytullah. And if a crane can fall there, and over 100 people can lose their lives over there, then what is our local mosque in comparison? It's the most significant religious place.
I do feel that the view of certain sectors or certain businesses towards health and safety can be rather ignorant, and it's not very important, and it will never happen to us. However, when something does happen, then after the event, then we tend to scramble and call upon favors and go into a state of emergency to kind of get all the documentation in place, which can be too late.
You would be surprised. In fact, I don't think you will. You might not, because I know you get in your industry asked for backdated insurances. I get asked for backdated risk assessments. Well, they won't say it explicitly, but people have alluded to that. To say, look, something's happened. We didn't have a risk assessment in place. Can you sort it out?
And there's no reason really not to have it in place, is there?
Exactly. It's not. Look, when you've got high risk,
it should be part of your business practice. It should be part of your everyday running of your business. It should be something that should be, at the foundation, at the core of the business.
Exactly. And you know what? It's amazing how many people do overlook it. They think it's a chore, but they're not partially to blame, because partially I've seen how risk assessing and health and safety has been given a draconian kind of an image by people out there, thinking, health and safety again, this health and safety stops us from doing all sorts of stuff. It's not health and safety.
Towards anything that's compliance required, anything that has any regulatory feel to it or any compliance to it, there tends to be a notion that this is a headache and this is a chore, but the value of that is only realized when something happens. It's like the insurance. You can pay insurance for 10, 12, 15 years and never have to make a claim, and you're just paying out. But on that one occasion, when you need that policy to work for you and something happens, that's when you realize the value and the importance of that particular policy. I've seen clients who've been insured with us for 10, 12 years, never had a claim. And it's just like they're putting money into a pot, you know, as far as they're concerned, they're just wasting the money. But then something happens.
Yeah.
And that protection is in place, and that, you know, and they can draw upon that policy. But it's I mean, I think both of the sectors and both of the industries are pretty much the same, where it's best to get it done beforehand and make sure it's all correct.
Be proactive rather than having to be reactive. Don't wait until you get punched into the corner.
Risk before
risking exposure.
Yeah,
that's exactly what it is. That's the strapline of my business. So that's entirely what it is, being proactive. And sometimes you have to be interactive. You can be proactive about stuff.
So what are the penalties for non-compliance then, if somebody does make a report or does bring something to the authority's attention, and they what kind of potential penalties be?
You've got inspectors who will come out and do their thing, and if they've noticed under Section 21, they can do one of two things. Section 21 of the Health and Safety Act, by the way, they can do one of two things. They can either issue an improvement notice, or they can issue an emergency prohibition notice. So an improvement notice is simply that you will have been issued a formal notice to improve a certain process of your business, or certain equipment, or whatever the improvement needs to be. An emergency prohibition notice is actually a prohibition on something that you're doing, and it could be immediate, it could be deferred. And this is basically to state that you are not allowed to do this or that unless certain other things have been put into place, or whatever the inspectors feel that you may have to do. Now, inspectors, you have to remember, inspectors have powers under Section 21. They've got powers. They can come into your business. They can search. You know, they don't have to be. You can't stop them. That would be illegal in its own right. They can seize goods. They can take samples. You know, and they can stop you from doing certain. They can either stop you from doing certain practices, partaking in certain practices within the business, or they can actually close the business down and say, that's it, closed until we get this sorted.
So what would your top tips be to the local SMEs, the local shops who, you know, I mean, we know that a certain size of business, after that point, they do take health and safety seriously.
Yeah.
But the local shops, the retail outlets, the grocery outlets, the local restaurants who seem to think that, you know, that it's not for us, we don't need it. What would your top tips be to the local SMEs?
Expose the risk before risking your own exposure, because this is essentially being proactive is going to be the only thing that's going to help them identify the risk. Now, my number one tip would be document everything, because I know there are some businesses out there, on the face of it, they may not look like they're doing much, and you may not find many documents, but they're very proactive in communicating good practice with each other. They're running a really good business, but they just don't have the documents to show for it. You know, what they did to make sure this was kept safe. Now, in terms of documentation, if anything, the government websites, including the HSC, they have really good guidance documents on there. Sometimes they have templates on there. You can download and work through it. It's not going to take you weeks and months to do it. It's worth investing that time for, and see as an investment, because once you see it as a cost, that's when you're letting yourself and your business down. In fact, lives can be at risk here. People's limbs can be at risk here. There's nothing more important than human life. So if you're willing to risk that, then you need to head check it. But in reality, to ensure that the correct control measures are in place, you need to have done an assessment of the risks in the first place. If you're in retail particularly, walk into your business as if you are a customer. Try and picture yourself walking into somebody else's business. Imagine this is someone else's business. Have a look around. See what could be causing harm of any kind or has a potential to cause harm. You know, what kind of hazards are out there? And then on the flip side, get somebody else to do the same. You know, you don't have to always hire expensive consultancies to come and do these things for you. all you need to do, if you're not sure, contact me. I can help you through it. All you need to do is get in onto the HSE website. Have a look at what the guidance is for your particular business. You've got a risk assessment template on there, which is easy to follow. It's a basic one, especially if you're in retail and low risk environment. You can fill it out yourself. It's not. The thing is, though, once you've done that, you can show you've done something,
And it's done. It's out the way.
and it's done. And even if you get it wrong, you can justify your methodology for the way you do things, because the law expects you to do everything so far is reasonably practicable in those situations. Was it practicable for you to do this? Yeah, then do it. It's as simple as that. And even if you get the answers wrong, at least you tried, and you can show that you did what you were expected.
So you obviously operate on a national level, and businesses of all sizes. So if anybody wants to get in touch with yourself, how can they do that?
warisconsulting.co.uk. Simply just go onto the website,
and I'll be sharing the links at the with the videos. So thank you very much for joining us this morning, taking time out on your Sunday morning.
No worries.
And let's see what the next 4 weeks bring for the country.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting 4 weeks ahead.
Yes. And our viewers, thank you for joining us this morning. I'd encourage you to keep watching us throughout the week. We have political programs, sports programs, chat shows, news, local, national, and international. Keep sharing our social media platforms. Keep tuned, keep engaged. See you same time, same place next week. Well, actually, no. Next week I'll be operating from home. I'll be doing a remote video due to lockdown. But look forward to speaking to you again next week.